Hi, this is Emily Romero, the creator of the Brain on the Web open educational resource. Thank you for utilizing Brain on the Web. It is meant to give learners an understanding of the three-dimensional human brain from a tactile perspective. Research has shown that the more ways in which one engages with a topic, the better one's understanding will be. Thus, I find it beneficial for all users to get a sense of what the brain would look like from this three-dimensional perspective. In what you're about to see, I'm going to use modeling clay to recreate some of the parts of the human brain. I hope that you enjoy this segment, and I hope that you find it informative and interesting. Thank you.
This clay demonstration is meant to be an accessible way to understand the brain that is both less expensive than traditional 3D models and also more hands-on. You yourself will have the chance to create the tactile model that shows the lobes of the cortex in relation to the brainstem, pons, and cerebellum. This will allow you to see firsthand how the parts of the brain with their individual functions come together to form our inner command center inside our heads. These two spheres of green clay will represent A, the subcortical structures, and B, how the cortex relates to the subcortical structures. The subcortical structures of your brain are those structures most responsible for keeping you alive, upright, and moving in the world, as opposed to cognition, which is handled in the cortex mainly. The subcortical structures we'll be talking about include the brainstem, the pons, and the cerebellum. Let's create the first part of the subcortical structures now. Go ahead and flatten the first sphere of clay with your hand and/or the rolling pin as is comfortable for you. And this piece of green clay is going to form the brainstem. We're also going to use it to form the pons. And I will speak about those for a moment as I continue to roll. Your brainstem is responsible for things that keep you alive. Your brainstem is in control of breathing. Your brainstem is in control of heart rate. The top of the brainstem, the pons, is responsible for some internal regulation. You can think of the pons as being the thing that helps you relax by a pond. Thanks to Michael Britt of the Psych Files for that mnemonic device. I've got to give credit where credit is due. And now I have this wonderful flat green kidney. I'm going to roll part of that kidney like a taco. I'm going to place this green part horizontally, that is left to right, on our cutting board. And holding the left half flat, I'm going to roll the right half like a taco. And there's going to be a little cup-like structure that the left half makes, with this right half being rolled up. It's almost snake-like. And now, this little green piece looks rather like a calla lily, with what is the left side open, and the right side now rolled up like a taco into that nice little snake shape. What's going to go on now is that I'm going to take the second green sphere of clay, and I'm not going to alter it. I'm simply going to nestle it into the calla lily here so that it becomes like a giant blossom. This isn't very symmetrical at all, and in fact this is losing its flower shape as I bend the remaining half of the first piece of clay around the second piece of clay. Now that our approximation of the cortex has been placed into our calla lily shape, it looks less like a flower and a lot more like a lollipop. Here on the right side of the cutting board, the brainstem looks like a lollipop stick. And here, the cortex on the left looks like a nice lime-flavored or green apple-flavored bit of sugary candy. The next thing we're going to do is show you where the pons is relative to the rest of the brainstem. And don't worry, we'll talk a lot more about the pons in the written section of Brain on the Web. I'm just going to go ahead and make a little pinch here so that there is a tactily feelable dot that is right at the top of where the stem piece joins to get close together with the cortex piece. You can see this dot here looks like a pimple. Looks like we have a bit of a pimple on the brainstem, but the pons is larger than that. So I'll go ahead and make it a big pimple, make it a big noticeable teenager pimple like we've all had before. And there's our implied pons. Not very big, but it exists. More toward the back of the brainstem is the cerebellum. The cerebellum's job is to keep people balanced. Thank you. The cerebellum actually comes from the Latin for little brain because the cerebellum retains essentially the same shape as the cortex. I'm going to create a division between the two brain hemispheres artificially here with this scoring tool. And now our cerebellum will more closely resemble the actual brain. Actually, it also might resemble a peach. Cerebellum is toward the back of the brainstem, down below. And there we have it. I'm placing the demonstration brain such that the cerebellum at the back of the brain is visible. The last thing before we move on from the subcortical structures, actually I have two last things before we move on from the subcortical structures. Number one is that I want to reiterate that this part of the brainstem at the very bottom is called the medulla, or the medulla oblongata. And it is the very basic of the basic parts of the brainstem. You certainly cannot live without it, and we'll talk a little bit more about its life-sustaining functions in the written portion of Brain on the Web. Medulla and medulla oblongata are used interchangeably to refer to this piece. The last thing I want to discuss is gray matter. Gray matter is basically, in a nutshell, I'll get more specific about this in the written section, but gray matter is the visible part of our neurons or brain cells. Gray matter is visible all over the cortex, so I'm just going to weave this little snake-like piece of clay around the brain, over top. It's looking like I'm covering the brain in spaghetti, or it's tactily feeling like I'm covering the brain in spaghetti. These curves are not perfect, but they approximate, and I'll just put the rest of this away. This approximates the surface of your brain. The surface of your brain is not smooth, it is wrinkled. I have heard the surface of the brain compared to a walnut before in how much it is wrinkled. I'm now going to set our cortex relative to subcortical structures model on the cutting board so that you have an uninterrupted view of it for a few moments. Next, in the next clip, I'm going to show you how the 4 lobes of the cortex relate to each other. So you'll see the cortex in a much more defined and a much more specific way. Thank you.